Good afternoon and welcome to Sihasin Hour. Today is Wednesday, January 25th, and it's a really beautiful day here on the Navajo Nation. It's nice here in St. Michael's. We've had some snowfall within the recent week, and so that's really been great. It's really been great to have some moisture on the land, and we're as you know, as Navajo people, we're very appreciative of the snow, and so it's great that we're really kind of feeling the winter weather. Welcome to Sihasin Hour. My name is Mahayo Manus. I'm the public relations director with Yeha Nido. She'eya Mahayo Manus in the she, Twitch Eatney Nishle, Sinsukatni Bashishchin, Omaha Edashache, Cherokee Edashanale. And today we have a very esteemed guest. We have Lyla June with us, and we're going to talk about some of her research and how it impacts informed Indigenous worldviews. So I'm going to give you guys just a brief introduction in terms of who Dr. Lyla June Johnson is. Dr. Lyla June Johnson, aka Lyla June, she's a poet, singer-songwriter, a hip-hop artist, human ecologist, public speaker, and a community organizer. She is of Dene and Setseis. She's gonna have to
Testis.
Setsesis, um, lineage and European lineage. Her multi-general presentation style has engaged audiences across the globe towards personal, collective, and ecological healing. And her messages focus on Indigenous issues, solutions, supporting youth, intercultural healing, historical trauma, and traditional land stewardship practices, which is, why we'd like to speak with her today. So I'm gonna let Lyla go ahead and introduce herself.
Oh yeah, greetings, relatives, and my people. Lyla June Yenishe. Aro Nanisht Eje Trachit Nishla. I'm from the Nanisht Eje Trachitni clan of our Dene nation. Aro Tsetsesus Bashishi. My father's mother is of Anadarko, Oklahoma, of Southern Cheyenne and European descent. Aro Ashin Hidishiche. My mother's father is the Salt clan. Aro Bilagana Eda Chanel. My father's father is of the European clans. Shema e Pat McCabe Wolye Aro Sheje e Thomas Johnston Wolye Aro Shema Sane e she's from Church Rock area, and Shiche is from Tohatchee area. So that's kind of where my Dene side comes from geographically. Akwit ego Dene as Anishla. So in that manner, I present myself as a Dene woman. Taos, New Mexico, I grew up in Taos, New Mexico with Taos Pueblos peoples mostly. So I'm kind of like still rejoining us in Denebakea. And that's been a many decades long process to recover our language and our knowledge from the boarding schools. Both of my grandparents went to Rehoboth Dutch Christian Reform School, so they didn't really learn a lot of the Dene ways. And so I'm trying to learn those. I've been trying for, since I was a little girl to retrieve that knowledge from my family lineage. And currently I just moved near Gallup to start a churro sheep farm so that we could have more churros available to our people. And I have no idea what I'm doing. And so I'm definitely calling upon a lot of Dene people to we're going to be learning a lot, learning together of learning from the elders how to do this. So anyways, that's my current work. I just finished the dissertation for my doctoral program last month. So that's out of the way. And I don't know what I'm up to these days. Honestly, I'm just kind of just trying to create a foundation for our people to have more connection internationally and more visibility, but not just, yeah, and also for our children to just have more support systems to hold on to as they grow up, uh, whatever that might look like, more sober spaces, more um, things so they can be proud of their culture, more presence for them. So that's sort of my goal right now. But so yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really happy to talk about this subject of Indigenous land management, Indigenous land stewardship, which is definitely like my obsession over the past 4 years.
Awesome, awesome. Well, as we jump into it, and I think that we share similar backgrounds, especially as we look at as ourselves as peers, and as we look at a lot of our generations, even the generations after us, and before us. I come from a family who my grandmother talked Navajo. My grandmother had a field and they planted corn. But as the generations kind of move forward, there was there's a disconnect. I don't actively participate in going out and planting as I should. I think about it every year, and actually, more often nowadays, I'm saving seeds because I'd like to get out there and plant. But but I've grown up on the Navajo Nation, and as I became more aware of participating in my culture and just participating in my community, it was definitely important for me to learn as much as I could about who I am.
Yeah.
How has that, and I'm not saying my situation mirrors what you're doing, but how has that kind of guided you in terms of your studies? Because it seems like that has been kind of a direction that you've taken to look back into your culture and how that has kind of affected land management systems. But just wondering, more specifically, how has who you are kind of directed your education and the things that you I guess studied?
Yeah, I'm lucky in the sense that both of my parents really drilled into me that number one, to be proud of who I am, and number two, that we're in a battle. Um, and we need to fight for our people right now and fight for Nehemana Hassan because she's suffering too. And so, for better or worse, I've always been kind of like fiery about all of that. Just like, um, so I also was really good at white man's education. So I was good at writing the papers, and even through my drug addiction as a little girl, I started to do the drugs when I was like 11. But even through all of that drug addiction, I was getting straight A's, and
Mhm.
I don't think that's a mark of intelligence per se. I think
Mhm.
because white man's school, they reward a very specific type of intelligence. Can you read? Can you write? Can
Mhm.
you solve abstract math problems? And I don't think that that's the only intelligence. In fact, we know that it isn't. Through research,
Yeah.
there's artistic intelligences, there's sport or athletic intelligences,
Mhm.
there's ecological intelligences, people who are just naturally really good at planting plants and identifying plants. And so, but I was good at the way of thinking that the white man system rewards for better or worse. So
Mhm.
that has given me what I think is an unfair platform to reach a broader audience where I might have a PhD, but I feel like our grandmothers are so much smart, like they deserve so much more of airtime than I do. um and so what I try to do with my PhD and with everything is to try to give that platform away to the people who really deserve it, who have that knowledge, who have the hatasis, who know the songs, who studied these things, and to really honor our ways of knowing. So So, I went to Stanford University for my undergrad, which was a
Mhm.
miracle, right? Because I was an alcoholic in high school. Just the fact that I got into
Mhm.
college, but so I brought all of that with me into the academics, not the alcoholism, but that too.
Uh-huh.
But
Uh-huh.
more, I brought my pride of who I am and
Sure.
this knowledge that we're in a battle. And I tried my best to fight for us in college as an undergrad, even though I was pretty wounded. I
Mhm.
tried my best and I did a good job for the tribes in California. Did some research with them, studying their sacred sites, mapping the sacred sites, showing how they would be flooded by a dam. This is the
Mhm.
Winnemem Nation, who we actually have connections to as Diné people, going back, ancestrally. But anyways, and then my master's degree was here at UNM in American Indian education at the College of Education at UNM. And what we did was we created a whole summer school called the Four Worlds Summer School, and with a program that we called Daneba na Entiendo Ohoa, which means the people's teaching and learning. So we were trying to experiment with education, community-based education, community curriculum development, and saying, hey, we as Dene people, we can educate our own kids, and what would we do if we could? So that was really amazing.
Mhm.
And then for my PhD, of course, I was lucky to go to University of Alaska Fairbanks. It's a remote program, so I could stay home.
Mhm.
And they have all native professors. They not only is it okay for you to be indigenous in that program, but you're expected to bring all that you are. You're expected to do research indigenously, which means you have to be reciprocal with your surroundings. You have to be respectful and responsible with the data. Everything's different as an indigenous researcher.
Mhm.
So at Stanford, I didn't have that kind of support. It was very my way or the highway, Eurocentric way of thinking. Um, there wasn't room for my culture there ever. So it actually wasn't until I left Stanford that I actually found places like UNM and UAF that could hold everything that I was. And so I really encourage people to, if you're going to go down the education route, to go where you are going to be respected and honored. Sometimes these big fancy schools, not everything that glitters is gold, and these
Mhm.
places don't have what it takes to incubate our ideas, to incubate what we're trying to do as indigenous researchers.
Mhm. Wow, awesome, awesome. Thank you for also acknowledging the the plight that we have, a lot of our people have with alcoholism and addiction. Um, whether you're sober or not, just being able to look at um, addiction and sobriety and seeing that there's a path for us that we can take, to heal ourselves is important. I think
Yeah,
that a lot of our people who suffer or face addiction, face instances of addiction, it is from historical trauma. It is how Native American cultures um, have been subjected to assimilation. How our cultures have been dominated by, colonization. And in many ways, a lot of people will say, well, we're here now, especially non-native communities and why don't you guys get with it? And it's been years, and just get with the program. And we are. We Native
we
Americans
are
have,
despite it all, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and we're successful, but a lot of our people do have to kind of deal with those addictive tendencies or situations. So I appreciate you acknowledging that.
Yeah, and
Um,
I should say, I'm very lucky to say that I'm now 10 years sober. So
awesome.
I'm 33 now, and I got sober when I was 23.
Mhm.
So that is a blessing because I started when I was 11. I was high and on drugs and drinking for about 12 years since age
Wow.
11. And then I cut it all because I had that spiritual support, And I
Mhm.
think we really need to help each other find that because you can't do it alone.
Mhm.
It's too hard to give it up alone. You need that the DND to help you, creator to help you. So I,
Mhm.
always gotta hand it to the DNDNE for saving my life, which is a miracle in and of itself and getting me sober. So I just want to, and I wanted to be able to say, on places like this, like I'm 1 year sober, 2 years sober, whatever it was. I wanted to be able to say like, hey, I'm 10 years sober now because I want to show people it's possible. And that is what motivated me more than anything else, because I couldn't do it for me, but I could do it for my people. So if you're having a hard time kicking it, just think about how it will help others, and that is usually what gives you enough fire to really to motivate you to do it, because otherwise we don't care about ourselves too much. But if you can remember that, if you could stand in front of a group of Native youth and say, I am 2 years sober, I'm 3 years sober, whatever, that can change someone's entire life. So that is what motivated me.
Awesome, really awesome. Um, so as we kind of are focusing here on Indigenous informed worldviews, and Lila has participated in a TED Talk. If you guys haven't seen it, go on YouTube and just put in Lyla June TED Talk and listen to it. It's very informative. It's something that I feel like we should all hear as Indigenous people and just in general. But kind of leading into that, Lila, regarding ecological healing, what are some of the destructive situations that we face as indigenous nations, in regards to protecting our land and managing our lands?
Yeah, so my dissertation was all about native land management techniques, and I just compiled a whole bunch of case studies around Turtle Island, what we now call the Americas, and also one case study from Australia. I think in total I looked at about 11 in-depth case studies, and cited like hundreds of other case studies, more surface level, but in depth, really looking deep at several ways in which Native peoples have managed the land. And to answer your question of like, what is it that's damaging our lands? What is it that's preventing us from managing our lands? What are the destructive situations? Well, I think one of the first things that I think of is the boarding schools, actually. Because yes, there's polluters, there's, corporations, there's extractive industries. That is always threatening our lands. But in addition to that, the erosion of our traditional knowledge was a big blow to our people. For example, I believe, and I wrote a whole chapter in the dissertation, that our ancestors used to manage the Chuska Mountains with fire, routine burning of the forest floor, gentle fire every fall or periodically, that we were doing prescribed burns before Columbus was ever born. Because what you have in the Chuska Mountains is you have these witness trees that have fire scars on them, and they're old trees, hundreds and hundreds of years old, and they show when fires occurred in the area. And so it's fascinating how, if you look at the graphs of fires that occurred on Chuska Mountains, it was like clockwork. They happened every 7 years, there was a fire scar. And then I swear, right at 1864, the fire scars almost completely stop. And this is right when our people were carried off to Huelte, to this concentration camp of Fort Sumner. And so I do not think that's a coincidence, because after we spent 4 years in the concentration camp, we were only allowed out if we signed a peace treaty, which one of the articles said we must give every child between 6 years old and 16 years old to the government for a proper English education to ensure the civilization of said Indians. That is what it said in this document. To ensure the civilization. So what happened then is, it was by law, by treaty, we had to give every child 6 to 16 away. And when that happened, you see those fires die out, and we stopped managing Chuska with any fire. But if you look at the diaries of people who came to Carrizo, Chuska Mountains, they said that there used to be huge old growth pines, beautiful trees with 4 to 5 feet in diameter. And in between there was grasslands, meadows, luxuriant, they would always say luxuriant grasslands. These white soldiers or white explorers who came through and were noting like how gorgeous this forest was. And then of course you have the logging. Sawmill is called sawmill for a reason, right? When they destroyed this old growth forest that we as Dene people used to take care of, which went away in the 1860s. So it's amazing how one of the biggest destructive forces, I think, to our land management practices has been the erosion of our traditional knowledge. And that's why each and every elder to me is so special, because they are the ones who are holding on to just what little bit we remember of those old ways, and I interviewed a Dene man in the dissertation, Roberto Nut Lewis, who talked about everything his grandma taught him. And so there's that, but kind of what you were saying too, not just the erosion of our knowledge, because let's say America gave us 100,000 acres back right now. Would we know what to do with it? Some of us would, most of us wouldn't. I wouldn't fully, frankly, but our elders, they're the ones who know. And so I think we gotta retrieve this knowledge back from the boarding school system. We gotta reclaim it, we gotta take it back, because what little bit is left is not even very much. We should at least do our part to document that and to remember it and bring it back. So there's that. And then the other thing I'll briefly just say is that obviously the paradigm that America and most of the world operates on, the paradigm that we are above nature and we can commodify her for profit, obviously that's the biggest threat to our land management systems, because it's insane. And the only good news is that behavior, that paradigm, that we are apart from nature, above nature, and that we can commodify her for profit, that is going to collapse, because by its very nature, it destroys itself. So that's the good news. But how it's going to take everything down with it is not so fun. But we need to be ready when they're already turning to us, right? They're already seeing the collapse of their systems. They're already saying, okay, maybe we don't know what we're doing. So that's when we need to be ready as Indigenous peoples to have our answers, because they're coming to us as we speak. The world is coming to Native people, even in the UN level, even in the Sustainable Development Goals and blah, blah, blah. They're coming to us and they're asking us, what do we do? So we need to build our fire, get our fires higher and our knowledge clear, and what our elders have taught us, so that when they come, we can teach the world how to be human again in an effective way.
Wow, that's really an excellent answer, and kind of I think that the things that you're saying are definitely correct in terms of how there's a little bit of a disconnect between how we look at maybe land management as it was ingrained in our culture and where we are now. Wouldn't it be awesome if if the federal government gave us 100 million acres back, 100,000 acres back, but the way that we look at land management, the way that we look at land ownership, and even how we kind of interpret the earth as our mother, and how we need to take care of it is different now. And I think that in a lot of ways, these things are all regulated through policy now, as we look at our tribal governments in terms of how people might kind of propose solutions. However, as Indigenous people and as the stewards of the land, we all have a lot of us have places where we come from traditionally, where we might have access to those particular lands. It's up to us to be able to to implement it, regardless of whatever our tribal governments say, and not so much regardless, but how is it that we can actively participate in these things and heal our lands if we're not actively doing it, and I really think that it's awesome that you talked about the research of the Chishkai Mountains and how our ancestors were implementing prescribed burns long before forest services now
Yeah.
use those things.
Yeah.
And as we can look at the evidence of Mother Nature, of trees and tree rings, and how that happened, it shows that our people were really forthright and looked ahead in terms of how we saw that we needed to manage the land in certain
Yeah.
ways. It's always funny to kind of to talk about how our ancestors managed the land, and those are kinds of constructs of where we are currently. But you talked about that, and just based on your research, were there other ways that indigenous people created land management systems? And I know that you talked about like living heirlooms of culture and land management systems. What were some other ways that through your research you might have identified some of these systems?
Yeah, and just to touch on the word management really quick, a lot of people don't like that word, and I completely understand because it sounds like we're playing God, we're managing the land. But I think the reason I use it is because it, like you said, it indicates that we had foresight, it indicates that we had a systematic approach, and it indicates that we were intentional, and it indicates that we exerted influence over the land, which is kind of sad that we even have to prove that. Like, but a lot of people, including our own people, believe that pre-colonial native people were cavemen or running around trying to find victims of their own circumstance and just hoping that a deer walked by. That we don't understand that no, native people were obviously equal to any other human on earth, and we had extraordinary systems that were, like you said, had foresight, had strategy, had a rhyme and a reason and an intentionality. And so that's why I use the word management, but I know it's not perfect. But
Sure.
so going to your question, the dissertation, I broke it up into 4 chapters, and I'll put it in the chat, or I don't know how we can get it to people, but it's published now, it's available now. But
Okay.
I broke it into earth, air, water, fire, the 4 elements, and so the earth chapter is all about indigenous soil management, ways in which there's 4 case studies in that one. To honor the 4 directions, I looked at 4 case studies. The water chapter is all about indigenous fisheries, and I looked at 6 different indigenous fisheries: the Chumash, the Algonquin relatives of Chesapeake Bay, and the Heiltsuk peoples of the North Pacific Northwest, the clam gardens of those nations in the Pacific. Just looking at ways in which they would work with the marine life was so fascinating. And then the fire chapter was all about Chuskai Mountains, our mountains as Dene people, and how we would manage it with fire. But in the introduction of that chapter, I talked about 20 different examples of ways in which Native people would use fire to manage the land across this whole country. And there's a plethora of examples of people, the Illinois Confederacy, the Shawnee of Kentucky, the Muskogee of what we now call Alabama, up in the Northeast in California, our Ndeh relatives, our Apache relatives, they're always writing, oh, the Apache are burning again. They're always pissed off that the Apache were burning everything. But they didn't understand the Apache were taking care of the land. Our Ndeh relatives. Even there's evidence of Mesa Verde that they had routine fire management. So if all these guys managed with fire, why wouldn't have we done the same? And when we didn't, we saw that huge catastrophic fire near wheat fields. I forget what year it was. I think it was 2009. There was a huge fire in our Chusco Mountains. And so if we don't do that, we have these issues, right? So that's the fire chapter. And then the air chapter is all interviews. You know, the air is like the breath that we speak, and it's interviews with four native land managers who are living today contemporarily doing amazing stuff. So um but I said living heirlooms in the TED Talk because it's like we would pass on these systems to our descendants. For example, the Great Plains, you know, they would burn the Great Plains and the Midwest grasslands every September and October. And so much so that, you know, how we have a lunar calendar as Diné people, there's a word for each moon, you know, so too they have a lunar calendar, and their September moon is called the grass burning moon in the Miamia language. So that's how important their grass burning that's how important this practice was, that they had a moon designated for it. And so what I mean by living heirloom is when you burn a grassland every September, when all the grasses have died and the summer has had its big shebang, and everything's starting to go dormant, and you turn all those dead grasses into ash, and you also open up seed pods for next year that can only be opened by fire. And you're bringing that ash, which has a lot of nutrients, into the soil, and that creates a nutrient dense grassland next year, which attracts the buffalo, attracts the deer, attracts the horses, attracts the lots of different animals, quadrupeds, if you will, that we had in this continent that were wiped out during colonization. So it would attract all these animals. And so when you do that for literally thousands of years, you create a spongy soil system, because that ash creates a living soil. Even the charcoal is like a little apartment building for microbes in the soil, and it stimulates the microbial activity in the soil. I mean, I could go on and on about the benefits of fire. I'm like obsessed with fire, but over thousands of years, you increase the sponginess, the water infiltration rate. So the water will suck into the soil versus just running off. And so what they saw, there's a great book called Forgotten Fires. What they saw is these white explorers, is they saw 4-foot deep topsoils in Montana of black, loamy earth that was just rich in nitrogen, rich in phosphorus, rich in life. And so that's what I mean by a living heirloom. We would hand this 4 foot worth of topsoil to our kids. And we didn't give them diamonds or necklaces or whatever. We gave them like, here's a bunch of living soil, you know, carry it on, keep burning, you know. And so then we didn't just follow the buffalo followed our fire. As far east as Pennsylvania, we expanded grasslands with fire. Iambitro, you know, that town, Buffalo Springs, there's a reason it's called Buffalo Springs. We had buffalo as Diné people all the way down by us, taking care of their grasslands. As far south as Mexico. And even there was buffalo in Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia, which we don't think about, but they were everywhere, and we took care of those grasslands. So that's just an example. I know I could go on and on. I don't want to talk too much, but that's just an example of one of the ways we would pass on to our kids these ancient systems that, like you said, had foresight and deliberate intention.
Awesome. Wow. I think the next question I want to get into is something that you're kind of touching on, is about the land management techniques that you feel could benefit, you know, our indigenous ecosystems. But you know, before we get there, one of the things that I thought was very interesting in the TED Talk as well was how during the pandemic, you know, we were a lot of people were forced to be inside. We had here on the Navajo Nation, we had mandates where we had to shelter in place. And you know, so we weren't out driving around. We weren't out to kind of just we had to kind of seclude ourselves. And so in the TED Talk, you talk about how some researchers were saying, well, you know, it's impacting our environments in beneficial ways. and that maybe humans, maybe it's better off, maybe the earth is better off without humans. And the thing that you said was like, no, the earth is not better off without humans. It's better off without the
Certain
systems
systems,
that
yeah, some
humans
of our
create.
systems, yeah.
And I think that's, of course, that's totally true, because um as Native Americans, we depended on our ecosystems as much as they depended on us. There was an integration in that. But I thought that was awesome. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about that, about how it's not the humans that are not needed on the earth. It's the systems we create.
Yeah, I mean, our people, we believe in ma'i, we believe in that coyote is always trying to trick us out of our own humanity. And so if anything, I would blame that force, that force that constantly is trying to play God, in this world. It's upset with the sacred, but it can't hurt the sacred, so it does the next best thing. It hurts the creation. And so I think humans are very easily tricked by coyote because we have these fears and we have these brains that were supposed to be a gift, I think, to the earth, but have become hijacked, in a way. And our child psychology and the war and the trauma, we stop acting like humans. So in the Yoruba tradition in West Africa, they talk about how the word for human being means the chosen one, but they don't mean like they're so great. What they mean is that the humans were chosen by the creator to take care of the earth. They were chosen to be some of the gardeners, some of the workers, the worker bees, to help things go smoothly, and that this brain was part of our gift to be able to, like a bird, for example. They can't really burn systematically. They need us to maybe do that. And even the birds like the fires. They like to roll in the ash and eat the seeds and stuff. But in any case, we have a role as humans. Like there is something we can give to the earth that no other species can. And there's things that a bird can give to the earth that we can't give. But the point is, each one has a puzzle piece to give. Each one has a role to play. And I was in Montana once at the Fort Peck Reservation with Leroy Comes Last, elder, Ihantuan elder up there. And he said, we were looking around, it's very beautiful, and he said, everything has a purpose. He said, every star has a purpose, every blade of grass, every deer, every rock. And then he looked at me and he said, and every human. And it was like this moment of like, it's so easy for us as humans to be like, oh yeah, that tree has a purpose. Oh yeah, that cloud has a purpose. But then when we talk about ourselves, we're like, oh, we're just such awful creatures. We don't have a purpose. But it's like, no, we do. We have the five-fingered ones. We have a role to play, and we can play it through humility. We can play it through gentleness, through compassion. That's when we step into our little role, and it's a big role sometimes when we apply it correctly. And so, but I get it. I get why people are, what do they call it? That word where you kind of hate humans, and you're just like, you just want to go in the mountains and get away from all these humans. But I think
Misanthropy, maybe.
Yes, that one. But I think that that comes from trauma. That comes from thousands of years of open warfare in Europe that our relatives there had to experience, just torture, literally torture chambers. And so when you have that amount of coyote just hurting people, then they're gonna forget how to be human. But I think that more and more we have to remember that we can be a gift to the earth. We've done it before, we could do it again.
Awesome. Great answer. I'm really enthralled by the things that you're saying, or I'm really taken back.
Yeah.
Maybe at this point, then you could expand on and you're talking about them, yeah, some of the land techniques that you feel could benefit indigenous ecosystems and all ecosystems. And just, as we had kind of, as you talk about in the TED Talk, you talk about aligning with forces of nature. You're talking about that now, intentional habitat expansion, decentering humans, and designing for perpetuity. But maybe you could just elaborate a little bit more on some of those particular techniques and systems.
Yeah, I only said four of them in the TED Talk because I only had a little bit of time. um, but basically, in the dissertation, I kind of outline the different ways that Indigenous peoples um, can and have in the past created, huge and beautiful, reciprocal, abundant systems. And so one of those things is that they would, the underlying values, were so important. It's because at first I was like, okay, well, how big is this clam garden? What types of clams did they garden here? How did they build the intertidal rock wall? How old is it? Let's find out. And that's what scientists like to do. They like to like measure stuff. But then as I started researching more and more, I started realizing like none of that matters as much as the heart and the goals, the intentions, the values of the people who are building them. So for example, the underlying values of those clam gardens are reciprocity, reverence, respect, and responsibility to homeland. Those were the things that these guys, our Pacific Northwest relatives, that's what was important to them. And then from your values comes your goals. So if my goal is reciprocity, or my value is reciprocity, then my goal is to make sure that the clams are given as much as they give us. So we give them a home. We don't over harvest them. When we harvest them, we give thanks. When we harvest them, we're not just creating a clam garden for us, we're creating a clam garden for the clams. We're expanding their habitat. And so when that is your goal, then your strategy is going to look like, okay, well, how do we do this? My goal is to give the clam a home. So then that's when all the how long it is, how old it is, where it is, that stuff, that's when that stuff starts to unfold and blossom. But you have to trace it all back to that original ethics, those original value systems. And when we look at Dene Bazad, it's in there, that ethic of Nehema Nahastsa, even just that word, our Mother Earth. What we're saying is she's our relative. She's a she for one thing. And so when we position the earth as a mother, you would treat her the way you would treat your own mother. So we didn't used to be rodeo, wrangle them and rope them. And that's not who we didn't treat animals like that. Like, oh, it's just a cow, just brand it. Would you brand your mother? Would you brand your mother? Of course not. And so we gave the equal standing of all life to our own mother, And so that's important, I think, that's the thing I think I stumbled upon the most, which seems obvious, like, yeah, we have to have an underlying ethics that is refined and good. But if you look at American food systems and land management, what is the value? The value is profit maximization, recreation. It's all human centric. Me. What can I get out of this 5 acres of land? How much lumber can we get out of this forest? How much yield can we get out of this monocrop GMO soybean farm? And on and on and on. So it's very much the value is profit maximization, right? And so that changes their goals and their strategies and how their thing blossoms and how it looks. But if you trace it all back, it goes back to our values. And so that's why Oren Lyons said, value change for survival. If we want to survive, we got to change our inner values, which I think Native people are poised to help the world do. Okay, so there's that. But then if we want to talk about more concrete management techniques, one of the things that we did here in the Southwest is we would take care of the watersheds. I went to visit our Hopi relatives, Akima Hunyomtewa, and he has this cupping tradition, where there's a like a watershed, like where the water flows down, and he'll make a little cupped reservoir. So when that water comes down, this little reservoir catches it and it sinks to the bottom right in that spot. And also when the water comes down from the hillsides, it's bringing nutrients in, nitrogen, phosphorus, soil organic matter from the upland soils, and putting it all right there in his little cupping area. And then he said, Lila, I plant my beans here, I plant my corn here. He said, it cannot rain all growing season. If he said it cannot rain from May to September, and my corn will still grow because I've stored all this water underneath right here. And I kid you not, I saw him on a blazing hot day, and he just scraped a little bit of soil off the top, and it was wet underneath. It was wet soil. And I was like,
Wow.
how? And so it's this technology of storing water in little places. And that's a good thing to do, because then you don't have to bring in outside fertilizer because it's coming in from the upland soils, and you don't have to bring in outside irrigation. All of that piping, and that's where that first thing of aligning ourselves with nature. He has aligned himself with what Neheman Hassan is already doing. He has aligned himself with the kinetic forces all around him, the rain, the monsoons, the topography. It's all bringing that water right there. So he just cups a little bit and boom, he doesn't have to do a whole lot of like conventional agriculture. They're importing literally tons of fertilizers into their fields. They're piping water from the Colorado River and destroying whole river systems. They're trying to force nature to align with their business plan instead of putting themselves where she's already trying to go. So that's one example.
Wow.
I could go on, but I don't want to. What do you think? Should I give another one, or
Yeah,
should I?
maybe one more would be awesome.
Okay. I'm known to like talk way too much. But so
Great.
one of the ones I'm really interested in is the Muskogee people of Alabama. Now they were put in Oklahoma at the Trail of Tears. They were forcefully removed on a death march to Oklahoma. But they're not even from Oklahoma. Like Muskogee people are not from Oklahoma. They are from Alabama, parts of southern Georgia, parts of northern Florida. And so they have what they call, and Marcus Briggs Cloud is a good friend of mine, taught me a lot about this. He said they have the longleaf montane pine. And this is an endangered species. The pine needles are like this long. They're like these really like flowy pines. And there's a mountain subspecies that only grows on the ridges. And this pine can only grow after fire. So and they have a moon that says they have to burn, I forget what it's called, but it's the moon where they burn. And they've created a language immersion eco village in Alabama. They bought a few thousand acres, I forget how much, and they have brought their elders there, and no English is allowed at this place. And they have created food systems. They brought the sturgeon back. They brought the buffalo back to Alabama, and they're burned all around this whole, I think they burned thousands of acres. And when they burn, they create, they open the seed pods of these longleaf pine seeds. They cannot open any other way. And then the old growth is protected because you burn away the competing vegetation. So if you look at our forests today, you have a lot of tall, bunched together trees because we're not thinning it and we're not burning it. So any seed that falls, usually the non-fire adapted ones, they sprout. So then if you go from St. Mike's to Ganado, right, you have to go over that summit.
Yep.
That's getting over treed, if you will. It's
Yep.
becoming, you have all these little saplings coming up, which, don't get me wrong, I love every single tree, but when you have all these saplings, they start sucking out the limited nutrients,
Mhm.
limited water, and the limited sunlight that is available to the overall system. So what you have is all these trees growing really high up, fighting for the canopy. They just want a little bit of sunlight because they need sunlight to live. So they're all fighting against each other. And normally, if you space them out, 13 trees per acre, 20 trees per acre, then they will billow out. They could grow and really take up space like they want to. But because they're so crowded, they're kind of growing, they're maladapting, and they're going straight up. And so what you have is a whole bunch of trees close together, fighting for limited water, and nutrients. So then what you have is have sick trees, because trees have immune systems too. And when you have a whole bunch of them crowded together, that's when you have these catastrophic fires, right? Because then you add drought on top of that, it exacerbates what we're doing of overgrowing these forests. So then you have a tinderbox waiting to catch on fire because you have a whole bunch of sick, dry trees close together. And that's what a fire would love to consume. So the Muskogee in Alabama, what they're doing is they're doing these controlled burns. They did a few, I think 2 years ago, of thousands of acres. They're reducing the fuel load and they're bringing that ash into the soil, and now it's flourishing. So that's another example that I would love to see brought back to our lands too.
Mhm. Wow, that's really those are great examples, and I definitely appreciate you being here with us today. And maybe really quickly, you might be able to give us a little bit of an example of some literature or books that have helped kind of guide your research that you feel have really been important to how you've been able to develop some of this, these systems or these techniques.
Yeah, I have a couple here. One is this book, Forgotten Fires. It's one of my favorite books. And one is Tending the Wild, which has been really influential for a lot of people. It's a California native book and then there's this guy who I actually met recently, and he's a nice guy, 1491, talking about the ways in which native peoples were already doing things here and shaping. And he also goes into population dynamics of saying like, hey, they've been lying about how much people were here. There was way
Yeah.
more native people here than they say. We were not scattered bands of nomads. We were gigacerous civilizations. And so, yeah, these three are cool. I like them. This one has almost like state by state, like just hundreds of examples of ways native peoples would manage the land with fire. And here's the funny thing, though, I'll say very quickly, is that I actually have a reading disability where it's very challenging for me to actually sit and read, which I just wanted to say, because I know a lot of other native people, we don't digest information through books. It's hard for us. And then you add on to that the trauma of going to school
Yeah.
and being taught these horrible things about our own people. It makes reading have a negative feeling to it. So I think that what helps is audiobooks. This I actually never read. I've listened to it. I listened to this book. This one I had to read because there's no audiobook, so I didn't even read the whole thing, but I read as much as I could in the parts that I needed to read.
Sure.
But to know that that there's audiobooks out there for those of us who are not, that we don't, as native people, we're oral people, so not all of us learn that way.
Sure. On the same note, aside from books and authors, you talked about some of the people you worked with, like in Muskogee, but who have been some just elders, researchers, indigenous people who have been very important to your research and your studies.
Yeah, that's a good point. All of these authors are non-native. Like, how sad is that? Um, because not because of any other reason than we're still publishing as native authors. So I
Mhm.
should have added to this list Melissa Nelson, her book Original Instructions, which compiles all native voices into like how do we live on the earth. And
Mhm.
her other recent book, Traditional Ecological Knowledge, was she's
Mhm.
a she's a she is a Anishinaabe woman, and
Mhm.
she is currently chairing sustainability studies at ASU. She was on my PhD committee, and she just published a book called Traditional Ecological Knowledge
Mhm.
with Cambridge University Press. And it's an anthology of all these native voices coming together, which I think is an important book. And also, on that note, just Dennis Martinez, Enrique Salmon, these elders who talk about kincentric ecology, like in other words, seeing the world as your kin, as k'eh, extending k'eh beyond just humanity, but to all life. Um, Marie Gladue of Big Mountain, she's so brilliant. Filmer Blue House, who recently passed, Fort Defiance. Mitzi Begay, she made my Afghan for my
Mhm.
kinasta.
Oh wow.
And she's always she's always kind of feisty, Sani, but she teaches me a lot. And Akima Honyoptewa, the Hopi brother that I talked about,
Mhm.
Gary Bisa of the Menominee Nation in Wisconsin, brilliant man. Val Lopez of the Amamutsan Nation teaching me about, spacing trees. He was one of the first people to explain how to do that to me.
Mhm.
Um, they're all over the place. These elders are brilliant. If we pray to find them, we'll find them.
Great. Awesome. But it's kind of funny for me to respond that way, but it's just, yeah, thank you very much for giving those examples of some books to reference and some people that you've worked with. It's important for us to always um give credit and shout out people who helped us along the way. And I think that it's important too to give light to some of the way that it's influenced what it is that you've done in terms of your research. I want to thank you for bringing this knowledge here to us today. I know that you said that you have your dissertation. If there's a way that we might be able to put a link in our comment section, or if you could send it to me and I could put it in the link, or anything that you might have published that we could further review or research for some of our people who are maybe joining at the end here, that would be awesome. And also just any other ways that we might be. Oh, I see you put it in there. Any other way, or I'll put that in the chat. But
Okay, no
I
worries.
appreciate just you joining us today. We were trying to get you on in November and then December, and just schedules didn't line
I
up.
know.
And so I'm
Yeah.
really appreciative of you of joining us today. And I want to wish you the best in terms of your new endeavor regarding churro sheep. And maybe, as it moves forward and develops, you might want to come back and talk about it, because it does seem like all of these ways that you're talking about land management systems and integrating the ways that we look at our ecosystems culturally and traditionally will play into what it is that you're doing. So I am going to
Yeah.
wrap this up here, but if there's anything you'd like to say in terms of last words to our viewers, that would be awesome.
I just want to say a hiya to the DNDNE, because I all of us were just helping along the beauty that they bring, um and yes, I'm carrying this knowledge, but I'm just, it's so not about me, it's so about the knowledge itself. And I don't even know the knowledge completely very much, but what little bit I know, I'm trying to share in hopes that you all will bring it further, that you all will take it further than I have, because this is just the beginning. And I just want to say Hiya and Sago to Dian Dene to Nehemana Hassan to Yada because these are the forces that at the end of the day are the most beautiful and the most kind and the most wise, and we're just here to stare at awe in everything that they've created and to just be facilitators and supporters of what these spiritual forces have created. And so, you know, I just want to put the spotlight all on them because that's who we got to follow right now, and what our ancestors always followed. So yeah, to them and to you and your whole crew, thanks for taking the time and organizing this.
Awesome. Well, yeah, Lyla June, appreciate it. I think that our paths will cross again, and maybe some other time we might be able to host another discussion. So for everybody out there, thank you for joining us. One quick word, you know, the Navajo Nation has dropped its mask mandate, but if you feel safe wearing a mask up out there. You know, we have a lot of elders that we're still trying to look out for their health. If you're feeling sick, wear a mask, you know, let's not put anybody at risk, and just kind of move forward, utilizing any safety precautions that you might be able to. But we're not just talking specifically about COVID. There's RSV out there, there's the flu out there, even colds could affect people in ways that might you know, be detrimental to their health. So let's always caution, let's move forward in caution. So thank you everybody, and hagone. We'll talk soon.
Hagone, oh, yeah.